Hans said nothing as he kept his head low while he stood in front of the village crowd with Eric in front of the castle's gates, where the king and a few soldiers stood, beside a large cage covered in a thin sheet. "Stay here, I'll be right back," Eric said as he didn't even wait for his cousin to reply, as he stepped up to stand beside the king, who was smiling with a smug expression on his face. "Oh, Louise, I'm so sorry," Hans whispered to himself as he hugged Pavlova close, while the kitten herself purred in the boy's arms, trying to comfort him to the best of her ability. "My people, for the past few weeks I have been attempting to build a new part of the kingdom in the forest just outside our walls. And as you also know, the vicious, bloodthirsty wolves that were thwarting our attempts to expand our power were also there, wanting to kill anyone who passed them. I can tell you now that they are not to be feared. I can prove it," the king bellowed as he nodded at Eric, who removed the sheep from the cage, and what the crowd saw made Hans wince as he held back the urge to cry out in anguish and sorrow. The wolf, Louise, was muzzled and chained in iron as she fought to try and free herself. "Sis!" a voice called from the roaring crowd out of terror. Hans then quickly turned to see Clara trying to make her way through the crowd. "Clara, no!" Hans cried as he then ran to the girl and held her tight. "Hans, you're no better than any other human. You claimed that the wolves were the beasts, but you're the one who lied to me. Why didn't you say you knew where my sister was?" Clara ceased with a growl in her throat. Hans could see the rage and hatred in Clara that she had for him in her eyes. It only made him feel worse, but he still kept talking. "Clara, there was nothing I could do. When I saw your sister last night, she told me to keep you safe, and—" Hans started, but Clara cut him off. "I don't need you to keep me safe. I don't care what you or anyone else tells me. I am not leaving without my sister," she cried as she broke free of Hans' grip and ran up to the front of the crowd as the king was kicking the side of Louise's cage. "Louise!" Clara cried as she pushed the king out of the way and ran up to the cage, while the wolf herself could only look upon the girl in shock. "Clara, what are you doing here? You must flee," Louise said to her sister, who, other than Hans, was the only one who could understand her, since they were all wolf-walkers. "How do I get you out?" Clara cried, ignoring her sister's pleas for her to run. "Clara, look out!" Hans shouted at the top of his lungs as Clara turned to see a guard try and grab her, which she was able to dodge at ease. "Let her go! That's my sister!" Clara screamed in the crowd while pointing in Louise's cage. The crowd then burst into mocking laughter, and the king's laugh was truly the loudest and the most mocking. "Oh, sure, little girl, and I bet your parents are chipmunks," he boasted. You scum!" Clara growled as she lugged at the king, only to have Eric knock her off her balance and into the dirt. "You will not touch His Majesty," Eric stated as he picked Clara up and trapping her in his arms so the king could continue to approach closer to the cage. "Now, to prove to you what I'm saying is true, I will kill this wolf myself. Guards, remove the muzzle and the chains and open the cage," the king demanded, pulling out his sword. "No!" Clara screamed as Eric held onto her tighter, making Louise growl threateningly. As soon as she was free and able to move, the cage door was opened. She pounced onto the king and lugged at Eric, who released Clara and tried to take out his crossbow, only to have the wolf bite his outstretched arm. "Eric!" Hans cried out in shock as he witnessed his cousin getting bitten. Put it back! The king cried at his guards as he pushed the wolf back into the cage, carefully, not to get bitten as well. Another guard held Clara back. "No!" Clara cried as she wriggled free of the guard and jumped onto the cage and once again imprisoned her sister. "You humans are the bloodthirsty ones! I, Clara, am a wolf-walker! And for what you have done to me and my sister, me and my pack will eat all of you! Ow!" Clara screamed as she howled as loud as she could and ran through the crowd and out of the walled kingdom. Hans had no time to worry about Clara and her plans. Once he was sure she was out of the kingdom, he immediately ran to Eric with Pavlova on his shoulder. Eric, are you all right?" Hans asked, looking at the injury on his older cousin's arm, to see there was a large bloody bite mark on it. "All right, everyone, calm down," The king yelled at the gossiping crowd of villagers. "There's no need to fear wild little witch girls that live in the woods. Me and my best hunters will burn the forest tonight and kill every last wolf that lives there. So go back to your homes as I gather my men for this very act," the king commanded, as everyone did as they were told. Well, almost everyone. Hans' eyes widened as he couldn't hold his tongue any longer. "No, please," Hans shouted as he tried to approach the king, but his cousin held him back. "What do you think you're doing?" his cousin gritted. Hans started, but he was cut off when the king approached him, his cousin and kitten. "You again, boy?" the king asked Hans, but then he noticed the blood on Eric's arm. "You were bitten by that beast?" He asked the older boy. "Yes, sire, but I can help with tonight. Eric started, but the king's laugh cut him off. "Ha! You call yourself a hunter? You couldn't hold on to a little girl, and then you get yourself bitten by a puny wolf. You're fired! And kill that wild beast in the cage before you go home," the king demanded as he turned away with his men, who were snickering at Eric and Hans. "Eric, no, please don't kill her. You—" Eric started, but his cousin's foul expression cut him off. "Do you even realize what's happened?" Eric questioned calmly. Hans started, but Eric cut him off. "Go home. I'm going to have to find a new job, thanks to you." At that moment, something inside Hans snapped. Clara was right, he muttered, holding on to Pavlova tightly. "What?" Eric questioned firmly. "Clara was right. Humans are the real monsters. And I won't stand for it," the young boy shouted as he placed Pavlova on his shoulder once again and ran towards the unguarded cage that held Louise prisoner. "Hans, no! Stop! Are you mad? We have to do what we're told," Eric stated as he grabbed Hans by the arm and held him back from the cage. "Why, Eric? Why do we have to do so?" Hans shouted. "I'm afraid." "I'm afraid, Hans," Eric stated admittedly. "I can't protect you forever. I'm so scared you'll end up in a cage," he stated sadly, but Hans' face was unchanged. "But I already am in a cage. Don't you see that?" Hans questioned rhetorically. Before his cousin could reply, the village bell rang. "Wolves! The wolves are at the edge of the forest!" the ringer shouted to the town, making the people outside run into their homes in a state of panic. "No," Eric trailed off. That's when he heard the creaking sound of the cage door opening behind him. Eric then turned to see Hans and Pavlova, now on the back of the large, now free, she-wolf. "I'm sorry, Eric," was all Hans was able to say as the she-wolf ran past his cousin. "Louise, I tried to stop her, but I failed. We have to hurry or she'll get herself killed," Hans told her as they ran out of the town past the soldiers who were asleep on the job yet again. The boy's words only made Louise run faster. They both knew they had to get to Clara, and fast. Clara had gathered all of the wolves in the pack that were with her and her sister when they first came to the area, to the edge of the forest close to the town where her former friend had lived. "I hate to do this, Hans, but you and the humans have left me no choice," Clara thought to herself as she then addressed her wolves. "It's time for us to attack those monsters! Let's eat them all! They have might!" Clara started, shouting angrily, but she then gasped when she saw Hans and Pavlova riding their way over to her and her pack, on her sister's back. "Sister?" she questioned in disbelief. Louise then let Hans and Pavlova slide off of her back as she approached her younger sister with a relieved smile on her wolf face. "I'm here, little sister," she said softly to Clara, who had tears in her eyes. "Louise!" the younger girl shouted as she and her older sister ran to each other and embraced one another the best they could, since one of them was a wolf. "Louise, you're back," Clara said cheerfully. "Oh, Clara, I thought I'd never see you again, until your friend here freed me," Louise exclaimed as she and Clara turned to Hans and Pavlova, who was now sitting at the boy's feet. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I was only trying to keep you safe, and I didn't know what to do, and I'm sorry, Clara," Hans said softly as he finally got enough courage to approach the two. Clara stared blankly at Hans for a moment, but then her face broke into a grin. "Oh, come here, town boy," she exclaimed as she laughed while hugging Hans close, who hugged back and let out a chuckle while Clara and Louise's wolves licked their faces. "I'm not a town boy anymore, Clara. Let's leave this place, all right? All of us," Hans stated, making Clara smile and nod. When suddenly, an arrow pierced Louise right in the heart. Louise Clara screamed as her sister fell into the grass. "No!" Hans cried. "Sis, no! What's happened to you? No!" Clara cried as she fell to her knees and held her sister close as tears made their way down both her and Hans' cheeks, while the wolves cried out in shock. "Hans, run!" an all too familiar voice shouted as its owner made their way towards them. "Eric, how could you?" Hans yelled, running towards his cousin, who had his now empty crossbow in his hand. And he pounded his fists on the older boy's chest. "You shot her! Do you realize what you've done? How could you?" Hans exclaimed in anguish, so much so that he and Eric jumped when they heard howls right behind him. Clara howled as it also was mixed with the sound of her cries, while she tried to heal her sister's wound with the golden light coming from her hands that she used on the day before on Hans' arm. Hans, Clara, Pavlova, and the wolves watched as Louisa's wolf form evaporated in the golden light and began to slowly drift away into the woods, which Clara, the wolves, and Pavlova followed, while Hans was held back by Eric. "Stop! No, Clara! Eric, I have to help her! She's dying! Let me go! Clara! Clara!" Hans cried as more tears made their way down his face as he tried to break free of his cousin's grip, but no prevail. "No, Hans, why? I don't understand," Eric said, trying to turn the boy to face him. "Eric, don't you see? I'm one of them. I'm a wolf-walker," Hans exclaimed. Eric gasped. "No, Hans, please, stay with me. I'm your family," he begged, which shocked Hans. He had never known his older cousin to beg for anything, even as a child. Eric was all Hans was able to say to his cousin as he hugged him close. "I'm sorry," Hans said softly as he drifted off to sleep, and in mere seconds, golden light evaporated from his sleeping body and took the form of his wolf self in front of Eric, whose eyes were as wide as plates. "Hans, Hans, come back!" the older boy begged once more, as he still held Hans' sleeping human body close to him. But Wolf Hans only whimpered as he gave his cousin one last look of pain and agony, and with all his willpower, he turned and ran after Clara and the pack into the woods. "Hans," Eric stated softly as he hugged his sleeping cousin's body closer. "Eric!" the king's voice shouted. Eric didn't even bother to turn around as the king rode up to him on his white horse, with a large group of soldiers following close behind him on foot, with lit torches to set the forest ablaze. "What are you doing out here?" the king asked furiously. "Hans, he's gone," was all Eric was able to say. "Bring out the cannon for when we find the den of the wolves," the king commanded, "and chain this lad up so he doesn't disobey any more of my orders," the king commanded, but Eric didn't care about himself at the moment. All he could think about was his cousin and what he had just witnessed, as he was chained like a dog to the back of the king's horse.